Good day and welcome back to the shed. Today we go back to 1950 to take a look at Robert Heinlein's Farmer in the Sky. And what a great cover art that is. That went on to win the 2001 Retro Hugo Award. So what I would like to do, as always, is provide a spoiler-free plot overview. I'll talk to what I liked, what I didn't like, and I'll make some recommendations, and I'll give this one a rating. So the novel is written in a first-person point of view, and it tells the story of William Lerma, who lives with his widowed father George. And life on Earth is pretty tough. It seems to be well overpopulated, which was a pretty recurring theme in the 1950s science fiction novels. But Earth is pretty overpopulated, life is really tough there, and there's a whole lot of shortages and rationing of food as well. So George has made a decision that he's had enough of this, and he wants to emigrate and be a colonist on one of Jupiter's moons in Ganymede. So we learn a little about the selection process to get to Ganymede. We also learn about the flight trip out there, so we learn a little bit about this spaceship and how it worked, and some interesting things happen on the way to Ganymede. So on landing on Ganymede, it doesn't take Will and his father George long to realize that life on Ganymede is not going to quite live up to the brochure that was advertising this colony planet, because life is going to be pretty tough on Ganymede. It's a pretty barren landscape. The soil is really infertile, so they're learning to farm the land, learning to understand how can we turn this barren soil into fertile soil that we can plant our crops and sustain life on this planet, all through the face of some rather interesting challenges that these colonists are faced with. So look, I found this to be a wonderful coming-of-age novel, and probably one of Robert Heinlein's better juvenile novels. So what is there to like in Farmer in the Sky by Robert Heinlein? Look, I've mentioned several times on this channel that I think Robert Heinlein is a brilliant science fiction writer. He's definitely one of the big three and one of my favourite science fiction authors, but sometimes he gets a little bit too preachy for me when he jumps on his soapbox. But I'd like to say that with these juvenile novels, you find that is somewhat toned down to a mild raw, I would say. You still get Robert Heinlein, and what makes Robert Heinlein just Robert Heinlein, for those of you who have read him in the past. So he doesn't hold punches back, but you find that with these juvenile novels, he focuses more on the science fiction elements, which I think sometimes for me is a refreshing and rewarding change of pace. And I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the fact that this was just your fantastic science fiction story about a young boy coming of age, traveling to this barren moon of Jupiter and trying to make life as he's getting to know himself and growing up. So I really did enjoy that theme. Now, the other thing that's really interesting, and I mentioned it in Stranger in a Strange Land, that Robert Heinlein has come up with some fantastic ideas in the past, like the waterbed. Like, he was the first person to actually suggest something like a waterbed in Stranger in a Strange Land. And we have something similar here with the use of a piece of equipment that can only be described as a microwave, something like 25 years before microwaves actually went to market. So I thought that was pretty fascinating as well, and one of those things that I love about Robert Heinlein. The other thing I really enjoyed was the terraforming and homesteading themes in this one. I must be a frontier at heart because this one really spoke to me. I just found it great as we saw life through the eyes of young William as he's trying to learn, to be a man in many ways, and also learn to be a farmer and a colonist and a member of this society through some really difficult, challenging times. So I really enjoyed this one. The themes of self-reliance, jealousy and courage in the face of adversity. And I'd have to say that this is probably one of the better Robert Heinlein novels. But what is there not to like in this one? So this one was commissioned by the Boy Scouts, and sometimes it feels just like one long advertisement for the Boy Scouts. There mustn't be a chapter in this book where the Boy Scouts aren't mentioned at least once. And I don't know, in typical Robert Heinlein fashion, it seems to me that he had a very strict view of what boyhood should look like, and if you were not a scout, you were not really prepared to be a man. It sort of reads like that in typical Robert Heinlein fashion. Now, I would have to say that with the plot was okay. I did enjoy the plot, but there weren't that many hooks, and I'd have to say that some of the really pinnacle and, moving moments in the novel didn't really have any sort of build up and were thrown at you cold, and sometimes that was a bit jarring and sort of distracted me from enjoying this one fully. The other thing I'd have to say, it's Robert Heinlein, right? It's going to be at least one thing in there that'll be controversial. And I'd say that this one for sure would have to be, again, the treatment of women. They seem to be just a nuisance and whimpering and whining and complaining people, and there was just really no reason for it. It comes up often in Robert Heinlein. I don't have to get on my soapbox to preach that, but if you've read Heinlein, then you know what to expect. And if you haven't by this stage, you probably know enough as to whether or not this one's for you. But I'd have to say, look, it's not that bad in this one, and it wasn't really disappointing for me at all. So I highly recommend this one. It's a wonderful novel, and one that I think you will enjoy. When it comes to similar novels that we've covered today on the Sci-Fi Shed, I'd have to say, you know, if you've enjoyed books like Way Station by Clifford D. Seamack, not so much for the setting around that way station and all these aliens coming in, but for that pastoral setting. So if you've enjoyed Clifford D. Seamack and his views about the pastoral landscape, there's an element in that in Ganymede when it comes to the homesteading and these farmers trying to build a life on this barren planet or moon of Jupiter. So I think if you enjoy Clifford D. Seamack's Way Station, there's definitely elements that I think you will enjoy in Farmer in the Sky. When it comes to coming-of-age novels, probably the best on the board that we have so far would have to be Alexei Panshin's Rite of Passage. This was a wonderful coming-of-age novel. I think it covers some rather interesting and philosophical themes that are sort of not in Farmer in the Sky. But if you like those juvenile novels, that coming-of-age novel, and you've enjoyed Rite of Passage, I'd say have a go at Farmer in the Sky, because I think you will enjoy it and vice versa. Now, one that also came to mind as I was reading it would have to be one of the other big three, Arthur C. Clarke's Sands of Mars, because this was also similar. It's a sort of a terraforming novel at that, and the difficulties of colonizing Mars in this particular examples. But there were some challenges here that the colonists had that were reminiscent in what we saw Farmer in the Sky. So if you're a big three fan and you haven't read Arthur C. Clarke's Sands of Mars and you read Farmer in the Sky, so have a go. And vice versa. They're very similar novels in many ways. Now, the one that definitely comes to mind when reading Farmer in the Sky would have to be Kim Stanley Robinson's Green Mars. Now, this is a massive novel. It's actually going to be up, if not next week, the week after. So I'm just about finished. I'm about 80% through. So this will be coming up shortly. But what you see in Farmer in the Sky is what this novel sort of expands on in a lot more scientific detail. It talks about, for those of you who haven't read Red Mars, that was about the trip to Mars. Green Mars is more around, okay, these colonists are now on Mars. We have first, second, and third generation of true Martians born on the planet, and the continuous battle to terraform this planet into what would be a green world, able to sustain life, plant life. So yeah, very reminiscent of Farmer in the Sky was Green Mars, and I wonder how much Kim Stanley Robinson was actually influenced by that novel. So that was it. I highly recommend the novel. On Goodreads, I gave this one a 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed it. It was just refreshing to read some Heinlein that didn't have him sitting on his soapbox so much, and it's probably one of the more enjoyable Heinleins I've read in a while. Have you read it? What do you think of Farmer in the Sky? What do you think of his other juvenile novels or young adult novels? I do enjoy Robert Heinlein. I've got quite a few that I've read over the years behind me here, and it's always an enjoyable, if not controversial, read at times. Can you suggest similar novels? I'd love to hear from you in the comments, and until next time, I've been Peter, this has been The Shed, and I'll see you next time in The Shed.